Welcome to the Deep Dive. So today we're diving into a really narrow stretch of water.
Right.
Might not look like much on a map, but it's been at the absolute heart of global power struggles for, well, over half a century now.
Yeah, it's often called the jugular vein of the world economy.
Which sounds dramatic, but it's pretty accurate, isn't it?
It really is. What's fascinating is how this one geographic choke point holds just so much strategic weight. We are talking, of course, about the Strait of Hormuz, and it's flared up again recently as a major flashpoint.
Absolutely. And that's our mission today, really, to unpack the history here, the geopolitics, and, the very real economic and safety stuff tied to this waterway.
We've been looking at quite a range of sources.
Yeah, trying to piece together why this strait matters so much to you listening right now, wherever you are.
And the timing, well, it couldn't be more critical, could it?
No.
After those recent U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, Fordo, Natanz, Isfahan, Tehran has explicitly said that closing the Strait of Hormuz is, quote, on the agenda.
And that's a statement with immediate, potentially huge consequences.
Exactly. Far-reaching ones.
Okay, so let's unpack that importance. Why is this passage so vital globally? Maybe start with the basics, the geography.
Sure. Think of it like a turnstile, like the Panama or Suez Canal, just as valuable strategically.
Okay.
It's incredibly narrow, actually. Only about 39 kilometers wide at its tightest point.
Wow, that's narrow.
It is, and it connects the Persian Gulf to the Indian Ocean. That's the key link.
Right, and the traffic through there is just immense, isn't it?
Oh, the strategic significance is, you just can't overstate it. Roughly 1/5, maybe 20% of the entire world's daily oil supply goes through there.
1/5?
Yep, and maybe 1/3 of the world's liquefied natural gas, LNG.
1/3? Goodness.
Yeah, every single day. So for countries that depend heavily on oil, think Europe, Asia, it's not just a shipping route, it really is that jugular vein.
You mentioned a tanker passes through every 15 minutes.
That's the estimate. It gives you a sense of the constant flow.
So, okay, massive volume, but bring it home for us. Why should you, listening, care about this waterway? How does it hit, say, your wallet?
Right. That's the crucial question. Because if it gets disrupted, it directly hits global energy prices. And that ripples through everything.
Like gas for the car.
Exactly. Gas for your car, heating your home, the cost of shipping goods, which means the price of stuff in the supermarket. Higher energy costs mean higher transport costs, manufacturing costs, inflation. It's vital for exporters like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait. But its stability affects all of us.
Got it. So it's not some abstract geopolitical game.
Not at all. It has real-world economic consequences. And connecting this to the bigger picture, Iran's threat to close it, that's not new.
Right. You said that earlier.
Yeah, they've consistently used this leverage for over 50 years now.
Yeah.
Especially when they feel threatened.
And it goes way back, doesn't it? I found it fascinating that even under the last Shah, before the revolution, after Britain pulled out of the Gulf in 71, Iran immediately seized those islands near the entrance, Abu Musa and the Tums.
Strategic position, absolutely.
And the Shah himself said closing the strait was not a problem for Iran, that it was a matter of life and death for them. He even intervened in Oman because he worried insurgents there might threaten the oil routes.
He did. His prime minister put it very bluntly, too, saying, it is our jugular vein and yours, too, pointing out how much oil Europe and Japan got through there.
So this control, or the threat of control, has deep roots.
Very deep. And then after the revolution during the Iran-Iraq War in the 80s, those threats became much more frequent, much more explicit.
Like when?
Well, Tehran repeatedly said they'd close it if Iraqi attacks hit their oil exports. Ali Khamenei, who was president then, warned in '84, basically saying, if Iraq cuts our exports, we'll shut the strait to everyone in the region.
And the world reacted.
Oh, yeah. The international community, especially the U.S., UK, France, they often sent warships, big fleets, to make sure those lanes stayed open. Reagan was very clear the U.S. wouldn't allow it to be closed.
And it wasn't just talk, right? There were actual clashes.
There were. Things got heated. The U.S. hit Iranian oil platforms in '87, damaged Iranian ships in '88 after Iran attacked international tankers. It wasn't just posturing.
And even after that war ended, Iran kept building up its navy.
Absolutely. They bought submarines, specifically stating the mission was to control the Straits of Hormuz. Their naval exercises in the 90s constantly focused on closure scenarios.
So this isn't a spur-of-the-moment threat after the recent bombing.
Yeah.
It's a long-established playbook.
Exactly, a consistent pattern. Though, interestingly, as one expert pointed out, they often use, let's say, second or third-rate officials to make the loudest threats.
To maintain some deniability.
Plausibly. It allows them to project power, test the waters, maybe extract concessions, without the supreme leader having to fully commit to something that would also, frankly, devastate their own economy. It's a calculated risk.
Okay, beyond the military history, there's this whole legal mess too, right? Different countries see the rules of passage differently.
Oh, absolutely. That's another layer of complexity. It mostly comes down to how you interpret international maritime law, specifically things like the 1958 Geneva Convention and the big one, the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS.
And the U.S. and Iran are on different pages here.
Completely different pages. The U.S., even though they haven't officially ratified UNCLOS.
Right, which is interesting in itself.
It is, but they largely follow its principles, and they strongly assert the right of transit passage through Hormuz.
Transit passage, meaning?
Meaning unhindered, continuous navigation for all vessels, including military ships, submarines staying submerged, aircraft flying over in formation. They see it as a long-standing international right.
Okay. But Iran?
Iran sees it very differently. They never fully ratified either convention. They have their own national maritime law from 1993.
And what does that say?
It allows for innocent passage, but only if it doesn't harm Iran's peace, order, or security. Crucially, they don't recognize transit passage at all. They don't even officially call Hormuz an international strait under those terms.
UNCLOS would say it is.
Yes. And Iran's approach, saying they'll apply different rules depending on whether a state is party to UNCLOS, that's seen as discriminatory under the convention itself. It's messy.
So what does this legal clash mean on the water, day to day?
It means friction, constant potential for misunderstandings or worse. You have the U.S. asserting its right for warships to pass freely, maybe even stealthily. And then you have Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, Navy, the IRGC, doing what they call maintaining an asymmetric presence, actively interrogating, monitoring, sometimes harassing foreign ships.
Like that British tanker seizure in 2019.
Exactly like that. Iran claims security reasons. The British warship escorting it insisted passage must not be impaired or hampered under international law. Two completely different legal universes colliding in a very narrow space.
It's like a legal fog of war, almost.
That's a good way to put it. A legal fog on top of the potential for actual conflict. It raises the stakes considerably.
Okay, so we got the history, the legal tangle. Let's hit the big one.
Yeah.
The economy. If the strait actually closed, what happens? What's the fallout?
Catastrophic. That's really the only word. Experts predict oil prices would surge immediately.
How much?
Potentially hitting $100 a barrel very quickly. One former intelligence officer said maybe a 40–50% jump within hours. He called it a nightmare for the world.
Wow.
It would choke off huge amounts of global oil and LNG supply. Countries would scramble, prices would skyrocket.
And you mentioned countries like India earlier.
Yeah, for nations heavily reliant on imports through Hormuz, like India getting crude from Iraq and Saudi Arabia, it'd be a massive blow, a major hit to their energy security, their economy.
And beyond just oil prices.
You'd see huge volatility in currencies across the Gulf region as investors flee to safer markets. Shipping insurance costs would go through the roof. It would slam economic growth everywhere.
But then, the obvious question. If it's so devastating globally, why does Iran keep threatening it? You touched on this.
Right. It's the paradox. Because a full, sustained closure would be economic suicide for Iran, too.
They need it to export their own oil.
Exactly. It's their primary source of income. So most analysts believe they'd only actually close it if their own exports were already completely stopped by sanctions, by military action, if they felt they had nothing left to lose.
So it's mainly a deterrent, a bargaining chip.
Primarily. A tool of last resort, used for leverage.
And just to confirm, there aren't really any easy workarounds, are there? Like pipelines?
No, not really. There are some pipelines, like from Saudi Arabia across the Red Sea or from the UAE to Fujairah outside the Strait.
But they can't handle the volume.
Not even close. They offer some limited bypass capacity, maybe a few million barrels a day combined, but the Strait handles, close to 20 million barrels of oil alone, plus all the LNG. Those pipelines are helpful, but they're nowhere near enough to replace Hormuz.
Okay, so the choke point remains critical. And on top of all this, there's this new risk factor emerging, the GPS interference.
Yes, that's a really worrying development. Since mid-June 2025, there's been a huge spike in GPS jamming and spoofing incidents reported by ships along the Iranian coast.
How many ships are we talking about?
Reports suggest around 970 ships a day experiencing interference near Iranian waters, especially around major ports like Bandar Abbas. It creates this digital fog.
Digital fog. What does that actually do to the ships?
It can be really dangerous. It can corrupt their position data, making the ship's systems think it's somewhere else entirely. It can make other nearby ships invisible on their tracking screens. It can even deceive the crew about their actual location or speed.
That sounds incredibly risky in crowded shipping lanes.
It is. And tragically, we saw the potential consequences with that recent collision between the tankers Front Eagle and Adelan near Khor Fakkan. The Adelan was reportedly part of a dark fleet, not transmitting its position properly anyway.
Right.
But this kind of digital interference just adds another layer of extreme vulnerability. It really highlights how much we rely on GPS and how we urgently need backup systems, maybe AI-driven visual navigation, things like that.
Which brings us right up to the present moment. Tensions sky high. June 22nd, 2025, the U.S. bombs those 3 Iranian nuclear sites.
Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan.
Yeah, and Iran's reaction was immediate.
Swift and very strong. Their foreign minister called it an outrageous, grave, and unprecedented violation of international law. He said Iran reserves all options and accused the U.S. of betraying diplomacy.
And the president, Pezeshkian.
He also condemned it, saying it showed the U.S. was behind Israel's bombing campaign.
And then came the specific threat, again, about Hormuz.
Yes. Officials reiterated the threat. Parliament reportedly backed the idea, though the final say rests with their Supreme National Security Council. But a Revolutionary Guards commander, Esmail Qasari, put it bluntly, closing the strait is on the agenda and will be done whenever necessary.
How's the rest of the world reacting to this specific flare-up?
Well, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio repeated the warning that closure would be economic suicide for Iran, a massive escalation, and would hurt other economies badly, maybe worse than the U.S.'s.
Did he single anyone out?
He specifically called on China to intervene, given how much oil China imports through the strait. But he also kept the door open slightly for talks on Iran's civilian nuclear program if they don't enrich their own fuel.
What about others? Russia?
Russia condemned the U.S. strikes, calling them dangerous. And interestingly, the White House apparently mentioned a 2-week timeline for trying to facilitate negotiations.
So intense diplomatic efforts are likely happening behind the scenes.
You'd have to assume so. Everyone understands the stakes.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what's the key takeaway here?
I think it's clear the Strait of Hormuz is and will remain this incredibly critical, incredibly volatile region. Iran consistently uses the closure threat as leverage.
Yeah.
But the catastrophic economic fallout for everyone, including Iran, plus the near certainty of a massive international military response, means a full sustained blockade is probably still a weapon of last resort. As some experts say, it would likely be suicidal for Iran.
So the immediate crisis might cool down, hopefully. But the underlying issues, the legal disagreements, the history of threats, these new navigational risks like GPS jamming, they aren't going away.
Not at all. Which means this vital waterway is going to stay a potential powder keg for global energy, for geopolitics, a place where one wrong move could have enormous consequences.
Yeah.
And maybe this leaves a question for you, the listener, to think about. In a world so interconnected, especially with energy, how can we actually ensure vital resources keep flowing through these volatile spots? Can international law and diplomacy really guarantee that stability, or are we always going to be reacting to the next crisis?
That's a really powerful question to end on. We hope this deep dive has given you a much clearer picture of why the Strait of Hormuz is so much more than just a line on a map. It really is a barometer of global stability, and its fluctuations affect us all.